Hello there everyone, welcome back for another Pearblossom press video. I'm Cassie Trask. Today we're going to be using the One Light. I did want to show you that there are two One Lights in the store. There's this One Light and then there's the one that comes in the Halo Light combo. This one's just a little bit longer and skinnier, and then this one is just a little bit shorter and wider. They both work the same, just their shape is a little bit different, so just keep that in mind. I have both. I love them both. They're great for all the cards. So we're going to be using this One Light from the One Light pack, and then I'm going to be using the Pearblossom Press stamp set along with some Lawn Fawn products. So we've got the Lawn Fawn Cozy Cats stamps and the dies. We're just going to be using one of the cats from there. There's also a little matching set, small one to go along with it. We're also going to be using the Book Collections die along with the Stitched Bookmark dies. So I love these. I haven't used them yet, but I'm excited to use them today in this card. Been wanting to make bookmarks. Don't know that a light up bookmark would work so well, but maybe I'll figure it out. It might be too thick for a book. Either way, let's get to stamping. So I've pulled out the cat that I want to use, and I'm going to ink this up using some Simon Hurley Create Black Widow ink. And I'll stamp that onto some Express It cardstock, which is just some good cardstock for alcohol marker coloring. And then I've got my Olo markers, and I'm putting those up on the screen for you. This is some simple coloring that I'm doing, just using a couple different colors. The cat I will make a little more complicated, only because I have to make it a Siamese, right? If you know me at all, I have two Siamese cats, and so anytime I can color a cat a Siamese, I absolutely will. So we're bringing in those colors that you see up there. My Olo markers are slightly limited, so I'm going to end up doing a technique called tip to tip, where I'll show you that here in a second. So I'll take that OR 2.0 as I try to blend things out, and I'll just take that and bring that to the tip of the 07.7, I believe it is, and then slightly bring that color in. So it dilutes the color that I have. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt your marker because it will just pass on to whatever you're coloring. I'll bring in the matching die, run that through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to move on to getting my background ready. So I have some green cardstock. This measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. It's the full front of an A2 size card, and I've brought in some Simon Hurley Create Ivy League ink along with my blending brush. I'll clean up my mess, and I only did that on 3 sides, as you can see, because we're going to end up adding a flooring to this. I wanted to make sure that we had some grounding to our little scene that we're making. So I brought in some Weeping Willow. That's going to go on that little brown piece that I've cut down to 5 1/2 inches by 1 inch. And then we can attach our floor or our tabletop or whatever you want it to be down to the front of our card. And then I went ahead and die cut out all the pieces that I needed out of some scraps. Once again, that is the Book Collection dies. So anyway, to save a little time, I did die cut all of them out, and then I'm gluing some pieces onto the back just to add some pieces to the binding, because when you die cut some of those out, they do leave some holes. And so I chose some different colors, and I went crazy with the colors. Like I said, I just went through my scraps and die cut out a bunch of different books. And then we're going to kind of play around with placement on those once I get everything ready to go. Like this one has lots of openings to it, and I just decided to cut down a piece of that gold looking color. And then all the books are almost ready. This one has its binding. There's also a couple of pieces that would be like a bookmark for your book. We're going to use those on those books that you can see the tops or bottoms of, I guess. And then everything will be ready to put on there. But before I do that, I am going to play around with that background a little bit. I decided to bring in my splatter box. Yes, Miles came in, one of my Siamese, because he must have known I was thinking about him, so he had to come in. I've brought in some Forest Moss Distress Spray Stain. We'll just splatter that, trying to stay mostly to the top of our card. I'll hit that with my heat tool. And then I do bring in some Distress Oxide Spray, which is the Rustic Wilderness, and I'm going to splatter that kind of on the top too. And this is where he decides to get very interested. I'm trying not to get any on him. I did not, by miracle of miracles. But I'll tell you what, that cat, whenever I work with a wet medium, he loves to show up. All right, everything has been heat set. We're ready to go. So now I can start building up my scene. and I'm just going to start stacking those books on top of each other. Now, my inspiration came from when my boys were much, much smaller, itty bitty kittens. They were so tiny and they would crawl up on anything. Yes, even some books that might be on the floor, because my daughter was in college at the time. And so they would just crawl up on the books and get cozy wherever they wanted. And so the little kitten looks very tiny on the stack of books, but that's about how my boys looked when they would climb on top. So I just could not resist remaking the scene of what it was like for those boys to climb up on anything and fall asleep just about anywhere. But I love these books. I think these books would be great to make, obviously, some bookmarks or any other scenes that you might like for the book lover in your life. I've had it for a minute and finally got a chance to use it. But now that I've used it, I'm going to use it a bunch more. All right, so we do need to piece our lamp together. That lamp is the only piece I used from the stitched bookmark dies. And so we're piecing the light inside of the lamp, and then we're going to glue the lamp down on top of the book. That makes it a very tiny light, kind of like a book light. But we're going to go ahead and piece that on top, and our panel then will be just about ready. Okay, now that all the pieces are on there, we're going to, well, I guess the panel isn't completely ready. We do need to stamp our sentiment on there. So I've pieced together the sentiment, 3 sentiments that say, have a cozy day. And then we'll just pick that up with our stamp block. I do want to heat emboss this because we're going to put it down on the flooring. And so I'll use an anti-static powder tool. Then we'll bring in some detail white embossing powder, and then we will ink up our stamp with a clear embossing ink. And then we'll cover that with that detail white embossing powder. Almost stamped it upside down. Glad I caught that. But I am not one to, if I mess up, throw it away. I will work with it. Maybe even just put something over the top of it. Now we're bringing in a piece of foam, and I'm going to poke a hole where the light is. It just makes it a little bit easier. I've had that piece of foam for forever. And so now I've got the hole in the lamp. And we'll bring in our card base, which measured 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches and was scored at 4 1/4. So it's a top folding A2 size card. I'll mark where the light is supposed to be, and then I'll bring out my one light. So this is, I just have 2 left in this pack. You need a battery and your mechanism, and then you just piece that together by making sure that the plus side is up and checking to make sure everything works, and it does. So what I've been doing recently is I have been building trap doors on all of my light ups. This way the recipient can reach the battery, or I can reach the battery, however I want to do that, but it's just an easier way to be able to get a hold of that. And so what I do is I mark it with a pencil, and don't worry, this gets completely covered by that panel. And then I put this over the top of a cutting mat, and I use my X-Acto knife, which my X-Acto knife clearly needs a new blade. It is chewing through that paper. But thankfully that will all mostly be covered. And then we have our little trap door. So we can put some glue on the back of our light, and making sure that the light is going to go over where I marked it with my pencil, we can just stick that down on the top, and then we'll check. Everything works great. So now we can bring in our foam tape. So this is a foam tape that I have had from a company that is actually just not in business anymore, so you can't get this stuff. But all I would suggest is if you use your regular foam tape, you might want to double it up because it needs to be 3 millimeters thick. If you can find a 3 millimeter foam tape, awesome. But I can't direct you to where this one is because the company isn't in business anymore. But I'm going to use what I got. So, all right, what I like to do with foam tapes like this, because sometimes they are a little bit difficult to work with, as you can see, I'm having a time trying to pull back that release tape. I like to pull back just a little. Of course, the middles have to come out. So I'm going to go ahead and peel off the release paper on the center, and I'm using my pickup stick to do that, to get underneath that tape. But I like to peel back just a tiny bit of that. This gives me a little bit of wiggle room when I try to put my panel down on top. I guess it's a little less of a commitment. And then once I get it placed where it needs to be, then you can peel off the rest of that release paper and push everything down. I'm not done yet. We do have to put a press or a push And so I'm using the Pearblossom stamp set for that. And yeah, I stamp right over the top. If it doesn't work, again, I can stamp it on a piece of paper and cut that out and put it over the top of what I stamped if it didn't work out. I just love to take risks, I guess. Then we'll stamp the back, and that's going to finish off the card. I love how this turned out. I can't wait to give this to the recipient. So if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. Definitely consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And be sure to check out all that Pearblossom Press has going on over on their blog, Facebook page, and Instagram for more crafty inspiration. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you soon.